several of you have requested a video on balancing equations, so I thought I would take a few minutes and show you what I think is the easiest way to balance equations. So I have a little worksheet here, and I'm going to just use some of the equations off of this particular worksheet for balancing equations. So the first one I'm going to look at is Mg plus O2 yields MgO. And what you notice here are some blanks in front of each of these. So when you are balancing equations, always leave some room in front of each of your atoms or compounds so that you can write your coefficient. And the key thing to remember with balancing equations is that we are concerned with coefficients. We're not going to change the subscripts on the atoms that are in our molecules or compounds that we're using. We are only going to add coefficients. So we have magnesium. Oops. Let me start my line a little bit lower here. There we go. Okay. We have magnesium plus oxygen yields magnesium oxide. So here is our equation. This is what represents the chemical reaction. So in this chemical reaction, we have some solid magnesium. We reacted that with oxygen gas. We end up with magnesium oxide. So this tells us, since we can't see at the atomic level what is happening in a reaction, we use this chemical equation to help us with that. So what I have to do is balance the equation, because due to the law of conservation of mass, or sometimes referred to as the law of conservation of matter, we know that matter is neither created nor destroyed. So when we have a chemical reaction, we can't create new matter and we can't destroy what we already have. So basically what this means is that the number of atoms that we start with, so the number of atoms in our reactants, has to equal the number of reactants in our products, or the number of atoms in our products. So whatever we have on the left on our reactant side, we also have to have on the product side. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I balance equations is I'm going to look at what I have and how many I have. So I'm going to write down the two elements that I have. I have magnesium and I have oxygen. Magnesium, there's no subscript here, so I understand that to be 1. So I have 1 magnesium. Oxygen has a subscript of 2, so I have 2 oxygens. Okay, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to keep these in the same order on both sides. Regardless of what order they're in up here, these happen to be in the same order, but sometimes they won't be. But I'm going to keep them in the same order so I can just compare across. Because I have no subscripts here, that means I have 1 magnesium and 1 oxygen. Well, according to the law of conservation of mass, I have to have the same number on both sides. I don't. I have 1 magnesium on both sides, but I have 2 oxygen over here and only 2 oxygen over here. Or only 1, I'm sorry, only 1 oxygen over here. So I need to get to 2. Well, remember, I cannot add subscripts. I have to add coefficients in front of my atoms and my molecules and my compounds. So I'm going to put a 2 right here in front. Okay. Now what that does, when I put a 2 as a coefficient in front, I have to multiply that by each thing in my compound. So now instead of 1 magnesium, I'm going to have 2, and instead of 1 oxygen, I'm going to have 2. Okay. So I multiply that coefficient by everything in that compound. So now my oxygens are balanced. I have 2 on my product side. I have 2 on my reactant side, 2 on my product side. But now I've upset the balance with magnesium. I've got 2 now on my product side and only 1 over here on my reactant side. So I need to go up here and add a 2 as a coefficient in front of this magnesium. And now I have 2. So I have 2 magnesium, 2 oxygen, 2 magnesium, 2 oxygen. I did not need to add a coefficient in front of my oxygen, okay? Because we understand that to just be 1. So I don't have to worry about adding a coefficient there, okay? So let's look at another example. We've got Zn plus AgCl. So got zinc plus silver chloride yields zinc chloride plus silver. Let me double check and make sure I've got that right. Yes, okay. So I'm going to start out the same way. I'm going to, I don't know what's going on with my my pen today. Making all kinds of weird shapes here. Alright, so I'm going to start out, I'm going to write down my symbols for everything I have. So I've got zinc, I've got silver, and I've got chlorine. And I'm going to count them up, and on my reactant side I have 1 of each. I know that I have 1 of each because I have no subscripts. So I'm going to come over here, and again, I'm going to put these in the same order that I wrote them on my reactant side, okay? And I'm going to count them. So I have 1 zinc, I have 2 chlorine because of that subscript, and then 1 silver. So I need to adjust my chlorine because I have 2 on my product side and only 1 on my reactant side, which means I need to put a 2 here in front of the compound that contains chloride. And now remember, I've got to multiply this by both. So now I have 2 silver, I have 2 chlorine on my reactant side. So now I've got to rebalance my silver. That becomes 2, and now I'm balanced. Because my zinc stayed at 1 the whole time. I didn't have to do anything to it, but I had to add a 2 in front of the AgCl and a 2 in front of the Ag in order to make those balance. So I have 1 zinc on both sides, 2 silver on both sides, and 2 chlorine on both sides. So now let me look at one. Let's look at the third one here. S8 plus O2 yields SO2. S8 plus O2 S8, O2, SO2. S8 plus O2 yields SO2. Alright, so I've got sulfur and oxygen over here. I've got 8 sulfur because of my subscript. I've got 2 oxygen, again because of that subscript. Over here I have 1 sulfur, I have 2 oxygen. So we see here my oxygen is balanced, but my sulfur is clearly not. I start with 8 sulfur on my reactant side, end up with 1 here on my product side. So I'm going to start with sulfur, and I'm going to get this to 8 over here. So I'm going to put an 8 in front, and again I have to multiply that by everything. So sulfur, I get 1 times 8 is 8. But notice I have a subscript 2 down here. I have to multiply the 2 times the 8. So that gives me 16 oxygen, okay? So whatever my subscript is what I have to multiply by the coefficient. So I have to say 8 times 2 on the oxygen, and that gives me 16 oxygen. So now I have to come over here On my reactant side, I see I have a subscript of 2. I need a total of 16. So what do I have to do to get from 2 to 16? I have to multiply by 8. So I'll put an 8 here, and then I multiply the 8 times the 2 of the subscript here. Okay, so 8 times 2, and now I have 16. So I had to add an 8 in front of my O2 and an 8 in front of my SO2 to get to a balanced equation. Let me find one. Let's see. Okay, let's look at this one. Let's look at number 14 here. Number 14, MgOH2 plus H1O3 MgNO3 Alright, so let's take a look at this one. This one's a little bit more complicated. It's got some polyatomic ions in here. And so anytime we have a polyatomic ion, if that polyatomic ion, which here's a polyatomic ion here, NO3 nitrate, and here's a polyatomic ion here, OH hydroxide, if the same polyatomic shows up on the product side, or on the reactant side and the product side, then I don't have to separate those when I count my total number of atoms, okay? So what I'm going to do is look, do I have those? Well, I have nitrate. I have a nitrate on the reactant side. I have a nitrate on the product side. So I'm not going to separate those. I'm going to keep those the same. I do have a hydroxide here, but I don't have a hydroxide over on my product side, so I'm going to end up separating that one. Okay, but I can keep the nitrate together. So I'm going to have magnesium, I'm going to have oxygen, I'm going to have hydrogen. I've already got hydrogen there, and then I'm going to have nitrate. I'm going to keep that nitrate together. So I'm going to count these up. So I don't have a subscript here behind the magnesium, so it's going to be 1. Now, when I have something in parentheses and I have a subscript on the outside of the parentheses, I have to multiply that by everything in the parentheses. So I'm going to have 2 oxygen. I'm going to have 2 hydrogen. Okay? Because I have to multiply that 2 by both of those. I have another hydrogen here, so I'm going to cross that out and put 3 because I have 2 here and 1 here, so I have 3. And then I have 1 nitrate. Okay? So I'm going to come over here. Again, I'm going to leave these in the same order. I have 1 magnesium. Now look here. This 2 is on the outside of the parentheses with the nitrate. I've left the nitrate altogether, so I have 2 nitrates, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. Okay? So I'm going to start with my nitrates. Think, why are you starting with your nitrates? Well, I think the nitrates might be the easiest to get balanced since I'm leaving those together. I don't have an H in 2 different places. So you don't always have to start at the top and go down. Kind of start at which one you think might be the easiest. So I'm going to start with nitrate. I've got 2 on my product side. So I'm going to put a 2 here. Now remember, I have to multiply that by everything here. So now I'm going to end up with 4 hydrogens. 2 here, 2 here. That gets us an even number. Even numbers are always best. Okay. And now I have 2 nitrates. Okay. So now I need a 2 here so that I can get to 4 hydrogens and 2 oxygens, and now everything is balanced. next.